me background, and they will be monitoring chat and letting people and helping us in the back end. So that is a super thing for us today. I can share the agenda, but I'm pretty sure that everyone has the agenda for today. So if you want to look at that, I can share it. The first thing that I would like to do today is I have a land acknowledgement that I would like to share with everyone. Simcoe Muskoka Skillforce would like to begin this event by acknowledging that we're meeting on Aboriginal land that has been inhabited by Indigenous peoples from the beginning. As settlers, we're grateful for the opportunity to meet here, and we all thank the generations of people who have taken care of this land for thousands of years. Long before today, as we gather here, there have been Aboriginal peoples who have been stewards of this place. In North Simcoe and Muskoka, we acknowledge the traditional land of the Anishinaabe, specifically Ojibwe and Chippewa peoples. This territory is covered by Lake Simcoe Treaty 16 and the J. Collins Land Purchase. Barrie South Simcoe is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee Iroquois, the Ojibwe, Chippewa, and Anishinaabe. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties. We recognize and deeply appreciate their historic connection to this place. We recognize the contributions of Métis, Inuit, and other Indigenous peoples that they have made in both shaping and strengthening this community, and in particular, our province and country as a whole. As settlers, this recognition of contributions and historic importance of Indigenous people must be clearly and overtly connected to our collective commitment to make the promise and the challenge of truth and reconciliation real in our communities, and in particular, to bring justice for murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls across our country. I would like to begin today's presentation by inviting Kwame Brown, who is the Senior Manager of Employment Services for Serco, and Kwame is going to give us an update. So Kwame, please take it away.
Thank you, Sherry. Much appreciated. Good morning, everyone. I'm Kwame Brown, Senior Employment Services Manager here at Serco Canada. We manage the employment services transformation in both Kitchener, Waterloo, Barrie, and also in Kingston, Pembroke. So I'm here representing the Kitchener, Waterloo, Barrie area, specifically Simcoe region, with just to give you a basic update in terms of who we are, what we do, and what we have been doing so far as a network, which includes all the service providers within the area that we work with. So I'm just gonna move my presentation forward. Oops. Okay. So in regards to Serco, Serco Canada, which we represent here in KWB, is a part of Serco North America, and it's been incorporated since 1988. So Serco's been around for a long period of time. The headquarters of Serco North America is in Herndon, which is Virginia. But our headquarters here in Canada, specifically in Ontario, is on Bay Street in Toronto. We're a company of $1.45 billion in revenues, and we have over 9,500 skilled and dedicated professionals, of which about 3,000 is represented here in Canada out of that number. Our customers across the board, so in North America, which is the US and Canada, is the Department of Defense, federal civil agencies, the intelligence community, Government of Canada, where we work on some projects with some of the Army bases. I think Goose Bay and Moose Jaw are two that I can speak of. Government of Ontario, which is through the Employment Services program itself. And more specifically, what we're known for in Ontario widely is our drive test centers. So all the drive test centers in Ontario is managed through Serco. And then again, various state and local agencies and commercial clients. So Our portfolio is 65% in defense, 25%, which is citizen services. So our employment services management is within the citizen services unit, and transport, which is 10%. Speaking more specifically about Kitchener-Waterloo-Barrie through the integrated employment services. So as you know, the provincial government has divested through I guess what happened with the 2016 Auditor General's report in terms of the effectiveness of employment programs, specifically with individuals, job seekers who come from social assistance. Through that, there was a tender, and we opened up for the tender. We first got accepted as the SSM, Service Systems Manager, in Kingston, Pembroke, and we started that program in integrated employment October of last year. And then we tendered and went forward for Kitchener-Waterloo-Barrie, which we started integrated employment services as of this year, January 1st. And to develop it, we had time to do human-centered design work and figure out what is the best way to have, what is the best way to make sure that we tailor the program specifically to the various regions within our catchment, right? Looking specifically at Simcoe, looking at Wellington, looking at Dufferin, and also Kitchener-Waterloo, and looking specifically at what things should be enriched, what things can be enhanced a bit. And we went through that process with all the different stakeholders, so service providers, community partners, business leaders, et cetera, and even job seekers. Sorry, I can't forget that group. And that led to our targeted operating model, which we're using today through employment services, or what we call integrated employment services. And we have labeled our integrated employment services as Employ Next. So just like how the ministry has Employment Ontario, we are identified in the region as Employed Next. And through that, we have 23 service providers in the region that deliver this program throughout the region. I think I already mentioned the 4 social assistance regions already, so I don't need to go there. So to give a good picture in terms of how we're doing so far since the start of January 1st, we've actually achieved 87% of our target in terms of working with the job seeker targets that we need to work with for the entire region. So this is all the 4 different regions that I mentioned in the catchment. And you can see from what's here is we're doing well working with, so just to go back, the streaming of the clients are when individuals come in and we have to complete the common assessment tool. And through completing the common assessment tool, there's an algorithm that exists. And through the answering of skip logic questions, a profile is created for each client. They're either stream A, B, C. Stream A are those with less barriers to enter the labor market and are very close to the labor market. When you go further down to stream C, they have the most barriers to employment and have a harder time in accessing the labor market. But based on this profile so far, since January 1st up until last week, we're already achieving 112% of our stream A targets, 130% of our stream B targets, and close to 60% of our stream C target. Overall, we're seeing 85% of the people we're supposed to see, but as of yesterday, we were at 87%. So what I've noticed is since January 1st leading up to present day, we have been progressively increasing the number of individuals that we're seeing, and largely due to the fact that we work with our social assistance offices locally. Then you're going to see a little chart there, and it talks about Francophone, Indigenous, newcomers, ODSP, racialized, youth with higher support needs, and persons with disabilities. So these are inclusion groups that we're supposed to serve. And you can see based on the information here is that we're either meeting or really surpassing the targets that are set to us by the ministry within our region. How does it look when you break it down to Simcoe? So out of that number that I presented, the 85%, Simcoe represents 39% of that total number, which is a large number. So 1 of 4, which is 25%, Simcoe represents 25% of the catchment, but represents 39% of the individuals served in the catchment as well. And you can see based on the different streams, the trajectory and how in correlation to the numbers that you see with stream A, B, C, how Simcoe is positively affecting those numbers for the entire catchment area. This next slide gives an eye-opening to where some of the clients who are social assistance, and I should note that social assistance clients usually stream as stream C. So that's why they're very important in this breakdown of service. But you can see here, based on this pie chart, a large majority of the individuals that we see that are referred from social assistance come from actually the Barrie office in Simcoe. I think which comes second to it is Aurelia. So you'll see largely Barrie, secondary Aurelia, and then we have the smaller areas like Alliston, etc., that provide referrals into the service of employment. And then here we just basically show a snapshot of the different service providers who are receiving these referrals from social assistance. And I think in this, what it shows also, because Barrie, as you've seen from the pie previously, is where majority of our referrals come from in social assistance. One of the larger service providers within the area, which is Georgian College, has received a lot of referrals based on client's choice or based on where the client lives in close proximity to the location. That's really what I wanted to share today in terms of who we are, what we're doing. One thing I want to note as well is that throughout this program, we have something called the Center of Excellence. And what powers the Center of Excellence is our working groups. So we have various working groups. So Persons with Disabilities working group. We have a community partner working group which has a different subset of tables that sit there. We have an Indigenous advisory table. We have a employer table that we're looking to get off the ground very shortly. We have a service provider table. And all these tables, what they do is we value continuous improvement. So if based on our research and based on the human-centered design stuff that we've done, we apply that on the ground. And if things need to be tweaked or whatever like that, we take information through these meetings that we have through the working tables and bring new research data, et cetera, and then help to tweak some of our targeted operating model service delivery components through the program. So overall, we've been doing extremely well in comparison to the other SSMs in other regions. And I think it's largely due to, how the region is broken up and in terms of the long-standing relationships that the different stakeholders within the regions have. Specifically speaking with the Workforce Planning Board as well. Since we've came on, Sherry and her teams has been very supportive of what we're doing. And we look forward to, collaborating more in terms of labor market information and how we disseminate that and apply it to employment services. I think that's it for me. I'm not sure if we have any questions, but that's the end of my presentation.
Okay, that's great. Does anyone have any questions for Kwame? Matt Neighbor, if you can monitor and see if there's any hands up. If you do, over the next few minutes, think of questions that you would like to ask Kwame. I would ask you to please type them into the chat and we will monitor the chat throughout this morning. And if we have questions for Kwame, we'll call on you. That's great. Thank you so much. I just wanted to let everyone know that this entire event is part of an Employment Ontario project that is funded by the Government of Canada and the Government of Ontario. So the next piece of our presentation today is Tom Zizys. Let me introduce you to our keynote speaker. Tom is a labor market analyst and a workforce development specialist. And for the last 16 years, he's undertaken numerous assignments on behalf of the workforce planning boards, local governments, community colleges, employment service providers to investigate and propose solutions for labor market challenges of various communities across Ontario. He's written extensively on the changing labor market and its impact on income equality and on the need for labor market interventions to be demand-focused and evidence-based. We'll have a Q&A time at the end of Tom's presentation. However, if you want clarification during the presentation, please don't hesitate to pop your question into the chat box, and we'll be monitoring it throughout. Please make sure that you have yourself on mute, and I will hand it over to Tom.
Thanks, Sherry, and good morning, everyone. I'm going to be lining up my presentation, so just give me a sec here. Here we go. From beginning. Okay, I'm assuming everything's fine on the screen, Sherry?
It's perfect.
Okay, great. Okay, as Sherry mentioned, we're going to have a question and answer period after the presentation. But if there's anything unclear about a particular slide while it's still up, please do write in a question, and we can get to that question to clarify it. The slide while it's still there. It's a small enough group. It's a short. It's easy to accommodate a clarification rather than trying to go back through the slides. So I'm going to be covering a number of things now. Okay, Sherry, I just got to ask, are you seeing? Oh, okay. my advanced button was not working. Now we're good. Okay, so here's what we're going to be covering today. I want to go over some labor market data to kind of give us a context of what's happened over the last while. So looking at unemployment rates, participation rates, job vacancy rates, and also changes in the number of businesses and so on. Last year, we covered a lot of data from the census, from the 2021 census, but we've got just a few more things that we were asked to present by the ministry in terms of profiling the demographics in Simcoe and Muskoka. A little bit on Employment Ontario client data, migration data, so that's about who's coming in and who's leaving Simcoe and Muskoka. And then the major part of the presentation is we want to share with you the results of the Simcoe Muskoka Employer Survey, and then we'll kind of wrap things up, kind of give you a summary of what we covered. Okay, so starting with the unemployment rates. First of all, I'm just going to kind of give the big picture. And rather than simply give the Ontario unemployment rate, and this is annualized, I always separate the Toronto Census Metropolitan Area, which is essentially the Greater Toronto Area. It's York Region, City of Toronto, Peel, most of Halton, a portion of Durham. We take that out because, and compared to the rest of Ontario, so Ontario minus the Toronto figures, because there typically is a different dynamic happening in the labor market between those two areas. Okay, it has to do with what kind of industries are there. The Toronto CMA has many more white collar jobs. The rest of Ontario tends to have more, college level positions and blue collar jobs and so on. And we can see from this slide, this precise point, that the Toronto CMA, when COVID hit in 2020 and when unemployment rates increased significantly, they increased much more in the Toronto GTA than they did in the rest of Ontario. Not to say it didn't rise substantially elsewhere, but there was quite a gap of almost 4% in the unemployment rate at its peak. But over time, we saw the unemployment rates start decreasing, and by 2022, it was more or less back to where it had been before COVID, and it's kind of continued in 2023 that way. Now this is a busy slide, but what we're trying to do is focus in locally And this is a 3-month moving average. So it's starting from January 2022 to January 2024. 3-month moving average is that StatsCan takes a 3-month figure for unemployment and averages out for that month. So let's say if it's reporting for March, the March figure is an average of January, February, and March. What they're doing is, because you're looking at a smaller geography, you want a more robust sample, so it combines it. But it still ends up showing the trend over time in a very useful way. Now, the area of Simcoe and Muskoka is covered by 2 separate economic regions, and that is the way now that the the service system manager areas have been defined by the economic region. So what it means is that Simcoe is in one economic region, the Kitchener-Waterloo-Barrie region, and Muskoka is in the Muskoka-Kawarthas region. And again, for the unemployment figures, we also do have figures for the Barrie Census Metropolitan Area, okay, so which includes Innisfil. So the long and short of it is that there's been the unemployment rate has been relatively steady. It obviously goes up and down, but the trend line has been relatively steady, except towards the end of 2023, it started inching up somewhat. Now, the Barrie figure, which is the yellow line, has greater variation, and it could be simply because it's still a smaller sample size, okay? And that even though we have this methodology of using a 3-month moving average, I do find that as we get into smaller municipalities, there's a tendency for the unemployment rate to really shoot up or drop down at a greater rate than a larger area, like let's say for the provincial figures. So what I'm saying is I would take some of this Barrie figure with a grain of salt, although it's likely that the unemployment rate did increase in Barrie, because it's also noteworthy that the red line, which represents Kitchener-Waterloo-Barrie, has also increased slightly over towards the end of 2023. On the other hand, it is interesting to see that the Muskoka-Kawarthas unemployment rate typically has been consistently lower than Kitchener-Waterloo-Barrie and lower than the rest of Ontario figures, which is the black line, okay? And in fact, has trended downward in the last 6 months. So I'm gonna make another comment about that in a moment. Oops, sorry. The other thing in terms of unemployment is we want to see the proportion of people who are unemployed for a longer period of time. So long-term unemployment is the percentage of those who are unemployed for 6 months or more, okay? And this is, again, annual data, and it's for all Ontario. And I go way back in order to provide some context here. So the first figure I'm showing is for 2006, because that is just before the recession we had in late 2008, 2009. So at that time, the long-term unemployment, so around 15% of the unemployed had been unemployed for 6 months or more. Once the recession hits, employers stop hiring, and those who are laid off find a greater difficulty, find it much more challenging to find a job, and the proportion of them who are unemployed for a longer period of time increases substantially after a recession. So here you could see by 2010 it was at 25.6%. So a quarter of the unemployed now had been unemployed for 6 months or more. And after that recession, it took some time for that figure to come down. It took almost 10 years for that figure to come down to where it had been before the recession. And then COVID hits, and so we have another recession, but a different kind of recession. It's not a recession because of a business cycle. It's a recession because businesses were closed for health reasons, right, for the lockdowns. So here, the proportion of people who are unemployed for 6 months or longer was even higher in 2008. And I think when I was doing this presentation 2 years ago, I thought, oh my gosh, if we're going to have the same pattern as we had after 2008, it's going to take a long time for that figure to come down. But that wasn't the case because it wasn't a business cycle recession, as I said. Once the businesses opened, hiring happened relatively quickly, and the long-term unemployment rate fell down substantially, thank goodness. It's still higher than it was before, but at 17.7%, it's at a much better place than what it had been. Okay, participation rate. So participation rate is the proportion of the population age 15 years and older who are either working or actively looking for work, okay? And again, break it out by Toronto, CMA, Ontario, and rest of Ontario. And I guess the story here is that the Toronto CMA tends to have a higher participation rate because on average, it has a younger population because there are more newcomers coming into the Toronto area than in the rest of Ontario. The participation rate fell when COVID hit in 2020 because people were saying, well, I'm not going to be looking for a job because no one's hiring. But it came back to historic levels right after the shutdowns were lifted. And it's interesting, even though it's only by a small amount, that by 2023, the participation rate was just marginally higher than it had been before COVID. You know, we've been seeing participation rates drop over the years, in large measure because of an aging population. Like the participation rate is very much linked to how old the local population is, okay? But what we are seeing is the participation rate has not gone down. It could be because we have older people who are deciding to stay in the workforce longer, either because they want to or because they have to, right? Because especially with the increase in inflation over the last couple of years, you know, the amounts of people that save for retirement may have been seen to be not enough, and so people might be working a bit longer or retiring a bit later. Okay. The local participation rates, there's a pretty significant difference. So Barrie, which is the yellow line, and Kitchener, Waterloo, Barrie, the economic region, have a higher participation rate by substantially higher than the rest of Ontario, which is the black line. And Muskoka Kawarthas has a much lower participation rate. And it goes back to what I said before. It's about the age profile of your community. And Muskoka Kawarthas just has an older population on average than Barrie or the Kitchener, Waterloo, Barrie area. Okay, let's now review the job vacancy rate data. So this shows the percentage of job vacancies in 4 areas. So we have the Toronto region, which is more or less like the Toronto Census metropolitan area. So that's the blue line. The rest of Ontario is the black line. The red line is again Kitchener, Waterloo, Barrie, and the green line is Muskoka, Kawarthas. There's a gap in the middle because in the middle of 2020, StatsCan decided not to collect the data for 2 quarters because there was no point. No, you know, we had a shutdown. So we just don't, no data was collected. Before COVID, so before Q1 in 2020, the vacancy rate was more or less around 3%. You know, it kind of went up a bit higher in Muskoka Kawarthas, but essentially it was, let's say between 3 and 4%. After COVID, you could see how all the rates increased substantially, right? In most areas, it got to between 5 and 6%, and in Muskoka Kawarthas, it went up to 8%. It has since, and as you recall, there was because of the inflation, the Bank of Canada started raising interest rates to kind of slow down the economy, and that starts slowing down hiring and employment, and the job vacancy rate starts coming down as well. All right, so that's kind of the pattern of what we see. It increases, then it drops, but it is noteworthy that in Q3 of 2023, so towards the end of last year, the vacancy rates were still higher than where they were before COVID hit. And this is the wage that is offered in those vacant jobs. That's also tracked. And first of all, a couple of things. There's a standard pattern of the wages that are offered in Toronto are higher than the rest of Ontario. Kitchener, Waterloo, Barrie more or less tracks the rest of Ontario figures. So the red line is pretty close to the black line. And the green line, Muskoka Kawarthas, just shows the lower wages offered in that region. Now, that's not to say that all the wages in every category are lower. It partly also has to do with the mix of jobs that are present. Okay, so if you have more entry-level jobs, in the tourism sector and so on, that's going to bring down the average offered hourly wage, as opposed to, let's say, some white-collar jobs in the Toronto area. But the one thing I will point out, and it's clear from the chart, the wages in Muskoka Kawarthas have increased much more. Like they have actually come almost match now the rest of Ontario. And I think that has to do with the other things that are happening that we're showing in the slides. Unemployment rate has been going down in Muskoka Kawarthas, right? So it's a tighter labor market. We saw the job vacancy rates were higher in Muskoka Kawarthas. You have a participation rate that is lower, so you have fewer people to draw upon, right? So it was a tighter labor market in Muskoka Kawarthas, and it looks like that had more of an impact on employers who thought, "Oh shoot, I gotta start raising the wages if I want to attract people." Okay, so there might be a way to kind of bring all this data together to kind of say, well, there's a narrative here, there's a pattern that seems to make sense. All these things are reinforcing each other. Okay, another thing in the local labor market plan that was put out by all the workforce planning boards is that the ministry asked us to report on the patterns for median employment income. Okay, so again, these are drawn from tax returns, but we only had the data going up to 2021. And this we are able to show by, quote, census divisions. So we have for Simcoe, for Muskoka, for the Toronto CMA, and for the rest of Ontario. And this first slide shows the median employment income for males. So the median employment income is that income where half the males make less than that income and half the males make more than that income. So it's the income point in the exact middle of the employment income scale. Now, interestingly, Simcoe males in this figure have a slightly higher median employment income than the Toronto CMA. And then the rest of Ontario is below that. And you can see Muskoka is significantly below that by, over 10,000. That might be due to perhaps more seasonality in some of the Muskoka jobs. But in any case, it's substantially lower. The median incomes in all the areas were relatively flat. They did increase in Muskoka, were relatively flat until 2020. But everywhere, and because I've done this for a whole bunch of other boards, everywhere the income really increased from 2020 to 2021. You can see in this chart, there's this kind of upswing for going into the 2021. For females, not entirely the same pattern. For females, the Toronto CMA figures are higher, the median employment income. In fact, the Simcoe figures for females is lower than the rest of Ontario. Remember, for males, the Simcoe males were higher than the Toronto CMA and higher than the rest of Ontario. Where here, Simcoe females make less, and Muskoka females also make substantially less. But again, the same trend of a significant increase in 2021. And I'm sure it didn't escape anyone's notice that the comparison between males and females is significantly different, right? You take the top earners among females on the right-hand side, that gray line, the Toronto CMA median income, and that's still lower than the lowest figure on the male side, the Muskoka males, right? So now there's a couple of reasons for this. I mean, partly females may tend to work more often in part-time jobs, so their median income, employment income, is going to be a bit lower. But still, in many occupations, even in the same job, even with the same level of education, even with the same level of seniority, females often earn less than males, and that's just part of the way our income structure, employment income is structured. Okay, number of businesses. So there's a couple of ways in which we track how many employers there are out there. Okay, first of all, we have a thing called the StatsCan tracks active businesses. So that means any business, any establishment that has an employee in the current month. Okay, so long as you have an employee, you're considered active. And this was a piece of data that was really useful during COVID, because it's not that we had businesses that closed down, like that went out of business. We just had businesses that were shuttered for a period of time, and they would have a temporary layoff, and no one is working in that business at that particular point in time. And so that really showed up in the COVID numbers. So here we're looking at the total number of businesses in 3 areas: in the Barrie census metropolitan area, because we only have it for certain census metropolitan areas, for the Toronto CMA, and for the rest of Ontario. Now, the total number of businesses, there's tens of thousands in Toronto and the rest of Ontario, and in Barrie there's only several thousand. So in order to make a comparison, I give the number of businesses that were present in each area in January 2020. I give it a value of 100, and each month, whatever the figure is, I express it as in relation to that 100. So if the next reporting period is at 95, it means that the figure's 5% lower than what it had been in January 2021. So you could see that in May 2020, that's kind of where we had the lowest figures for the number of active businesses in all these areas, because this is now a couple of months into the lockdown. And you could see that the Toronto CMA, there was that much fewer active businesses, because the lockdown has had a greater impact and lasted longer in the Toronto area than they did elsewhere. There was a relatively quick recovery as the lockdown started lifting, but it's not as if all businesses did come back, right? But we reached the number of, like, the blue line, which shows the Barrie CMA. You could see that it reaches the level of 100 already around November or December of 2020. So that means by November or December of 2020 in Barrie, the number of businesses returned to what it had been in January 2020. And then it keeps rising and then kind of plateaus through most of 2023. But so Barrie has had a strong recovery, and now, you know, for other reasons, which have to do with, as I mentioned before, the increase in interest rates, kind of the level of economic activity as measured by the number of active businesses has kind of stayed relatively stable. And rest of Ontario, it took a bit longer to get back to the 100 level. That was more around mid-2021, but it also kept on increasing and also has plateaued. And Toronto took the longest time to get back. You know, it was into around 2022, also increased a bit more and also plateaued. So we're all kind of plateauing now in terms of the number of active businesses. We are able to break out these patterns in terms of industries. And so I took the entire tourism sector. So that includes tourism, transportation, it includes accommodation and food services, arts, entertainment, and recreation. And we can cluster all of those into one category. And the main point, and I think we're all so familiar with this now, is that the tourism sector, that whole service industry category, was especially affected by COVID, right? Because they're the ones who couldn't serve customers face to face. So in terms of all other industries, you know, the number of active businesses dropped by around 14%. Whereas in the tourism sector, it dropped by almost double that amount. Like it was around 27 or so percent. Okay. And in all the other industries, they returned to that 100 level by end of 2021 and has continued to grow. Whereas the tourism sector has only in the last year returned to that 100 level. And in certain subcategories, I can still say that, you know, the numbers are still are below what they had been before COVID, right? The tourism industry has just only now started to get back to where they were before COVID. Okay, now this, and again, another busy slide, but this is the and these, you know, this data is also in the local labor market plan. So you can have a look at, there's several tables that show the business count. So the StatsCan has what it calls the Canadian Business Counts. It's essentially a census of businesses, and it's broken down by industry and by number of employees. It comes out every 6 months. So there's a measurement done in June and a measurement done in December. It's primarily based on administrative data. So they look at payroll data and HST data and so on, as well as it's complemented by survey data, and it's a pretty robust sample size. What I'm showing here is comparing what the difference between the numbers of the measurement in June 2022 and in June 2023. And for each cell, that's the difference. Okay, so you know, what the figure was a year ago and what it was just recently. And I color code it so you can see what the pattern looks like, so that if it's green, it's an increase, and if it's orange, it's a decrease, and 0 is no cover. Basically, the huge increases are all among the smaller firms, right? Those with 0 employees. So if you have 0 employees, you're a solo operator, you know, and you can be a consultant, you can be a skilled tradesperson, you can be real estate and rental leasing, right? You see there's a figure in the 0 column of 832. What is that? That is primarily landlords. I mean, there's a smaller category is real estate agents, but the main category here are landlords. So a whole bunch of many more, you know, people just renting out and, you know, charging income for either, you know, a standalone residential unit, or even if, you know, a unit within their house. You know, I guess, you know, what we've been seeing in terms of the housing affordability crisis is that it's also drawn more people into renting out spare space they have in their dwellings. But we see increases also like transportation and warehousing, large number of increases. Those are largely, if it's a zero employee category, it's usually truck drivers. Construction, large number of increases. Healthcare and social assistance, those are a lot of physician offices, physicians or any health care practitioner. You get into the larger sizes, and there we actually, like among the 100 or more employee categories, we see some declines. Like we see 4 fewer retail trade operations with 100 or more employees. We see administrative and support. So that will include, we see 3 less. That will include like janitorial services or landscapers or temp agencies. But overall, at the bottom, you could see the total changes, and there has, for the last 2 years, in every single category, there has been a net growth in the number of establishments, and Simcoe has been growing at quite a steady rate. You can see where I have that red arrow. That is COVID. And there you see declines in the net numbers. And there were primarily, it's not as if there were 18 companies that had 100 or more employees that went out of business. It's they probably shed enough workers that they moved from the 100 or more employee category to a lower category. The same thing for the 20 to 99 categories. Muskoka has a slightly is not as you can see, there's more losses, and in terms of net losses, there was actually 4 fewer firms with 100 or more employees. There's been a couple of declines in the manufacturing sector, also again in administrative support, and even in accommodation and food services, 2 fewer establishments with 100 or more employees. So compared to the year before, if you go to the bottom of the screen, so the green arrow shows the most recent changes, and we have this orange figure for 100 or more employees, but the line below, it's all green, which means we had increases everywhere. And the year before that, that's where we see the impact of COVID. Okay, now just quickly on some of the census data. So this was profiling the demographic categories. So we have it broken down by racialized categories and newcomers, by gender, and by age. Okay, the first column shows the actual numbers for Simcoe. The second shows what the percentage share of that category is in the total population. Oh, and I should also mention, we're talking about 15 years and older. Okay, and that's important because the data that we get from through the ministry from StatsCan, we're focusing on the labor market. So we're only interested in people who are 15 years and older. So these shares don't represent the entire population, and in some instances, the 0 to 15 population will probably have more newcomers, more racialized, more indigenous than the general population. So just to put that caution out there, that this is only for 15 years and older. The third column shows the 2016 figure, and the fourth column shows the change between 2016 and 2021. So I guess in terms of just the percentage share, we could see that indigenous is 4.4%, racialized 11.3%, newcomer 1.5%. So newcomer, as we know, that's someone who's arrived to Canada in the last 5 years. It's not the immigrant category, it's just the recent immigrant category. But those 2 categories, racialized and newcomers, are growing at a very large rate. But they're starting from a very small base. In terms of the age categories, I guess the thing to point out is in terms of the percentage change, you can see at the bottom, the age group that is growing fastest in Simcoe are 65 years and older. They grew by 24%. and followed by the category of 25 to 44-year-olds. The 15, if you can see, the 15 to 24-year-old category stayed the same essentially. It increased by 0.5%. So we're, this is all part of the aging population, right? We're having fewer kids, we're living longer. So the older population's getting larger. Again, we talked about that in terms of its impact on the participation rate. Muskoka, same figures here. Slightly smaller Indigenous population, much smaller racialized population, much smaller newcomer population. In terms of the age categories, same thing, right? 65 years and older, growing faster than anyone else. 15 to 24-year-olds actually declining by 5%. Right. So again, all that shift in terms of ages. All right. Now,
sorry, Tom, before we move on, we do have a question from Barrie Literacy Council. Are these official age bands? It seems the youth category is a moving target depending on the program.
These are the StatsCan age bands. So StatsCan yes, uses youth as 15 to 24-year-olds. I know there are certain programs where the age can be up to 29, but for statistics, it's 15 to 24. Okay. All right. Finally, just a bit on Employment Ontario data. There's much more that we have in the local labor market plan. I'm just going to kind of give a quick summary. So these have been the client numbers across a number of programs. So employment services, literacy and basic skills, Better Jobs Ontario, the program previously known as Second Career, and apprenticeship registrations. And the board area, so that means the Skillforce area, so that's Simcoe and Muskoka. The region is the central region, so it's, the Toronto, Peel, Halton, York, Durham, Simcoe and Muskoka area, and then Ontario. And essentially the story is that we have in every category, as we all know, the numbers really dropped in 2020 to 2021 and in 2021, 2022 because of COVID. But the recovery has been very tepid. I think in almost every category, if we go across, and whether it's regardless of geography and regardless of program, in 2022, 2023, we have not come back to where we were in 2019, 2020 before COVID. So in the, a couple of years after COVID, we're still not back to the numbers we had in the year before COVID, except in the case of apprenticeship. So in apprenticeship, if you go down to the bottom and you just compare the figures between 2019-20 and 2019-20 and 22-23, at the board level, it's more or less equal, and at the region and Ontario level, it's increased. Okay, but everywhere else, it's gone down. And in terms of the impact, so now we have the service system managers, and as Kwame was mentioning, like we've moved to a new system of how we classify Employment Ontario clients. We have Stream A, Stream B, Stream C. And under the old system, we had unassisted clients and assisted clients. So I was just kind of curious to see what has that meant in terms of the total number of clients. If we take all unassisted and assisted clients and all Stream A, Stream B, Stream C clients in each year, because we didn't have that at the start of this chart, but over time, we've had more SSMs coming into operation. So the total number of EO clients is that blue line. And you can see it was steady just before COVID, and then it really dropped in 2020, 2021. And it stayed stayed that level in 2021, 22, and it's just slightly increased in 2022, 2023. The orange line is the actual number of unemployed individuals. So, really shot up in COVID and it's really come down. It's kind of funny in a way that the more unemployed we had, the fewer clients we had, but it all had to do with employers not hiring at that time. But the long and short of it is that compared to pre-COVID, the Employment Ontario system appears to be serving around 100,000 fewer people than it did in the last year. It's slightly under 600,000 in total, and before COVID, it was slightly over 700,000. So we are serving fewer people. Period. Obviously, the transition from one system to another has, takes a while for the client numbers to increase, but it looks like we're not going to be serving the same number of people that we did before, including assisted and unassisted, like all across all categories of clients. And just to highlight, what has been the change in terms of the mix of clients, and as Kwame mentioned, the part of the change was to place a greater focus on Ontario Works clients. So here I'm comparing in each year those who are still operating under the old system of EO and those who are operating under SSMs. And you can see that this is where the biggest change has happened in the proportion of OW clients. So EO clients have around 12% of 12 to 14% of Ontario Works clients, and SSMs it's around a third, like anywhere from 28 to 35%. Slightly higher proportion of ODSP clients also, which was also a goal of this new system, but just slightly higher. Because they don't have as many OW clients, EO clients have many more who have no source of income. There was a much higher proportion of EI clients in 2021, but that was a phenomenon of COVID. That number's gone down in 2022. And otherwise, in terms of proportion of employed or other categories, it's much the same. The big difference is in the Ontario Works numbers. Oh, geez. Net migration. Sorry, I'm trying to get through everything because I know we have a lot of slides on the survey. Okay, so this shows the net numbers of migrants coming into both Simcoe and Muskoka. Simcoe is the orange, Muskoka is the blue. So the main story here, the largest proportion of net migrants, so you subtract those coming in and those leaving, Simcoe grows because it receives a lot of 25 to 44-year-olds. Muskoka's growth is slightly more among those who are a bit older, 45 to 64-year-olds, like there's around 3,000. The second category is the 25 to 44-year-olds, whereas Simcoe, it's more 25 to 44-year-olds and 0 to 17-year-olds. So here's another one of those instances where you've got a different source. This is Revenue Canada that produces this data. So they classify, they don't have 0 to 14 and 15 to 24. They do it 0 to 17 and 18 to 24, which really makes it a lot of fun to try and compare the two. In terms of where people are coming from, so intra-provincial means they're coming from the rest of Ontario. Inter-provincial means they're coming or going to a different province, and international means they're coming or going from somewhere outside of Canada. So essentially, basically almost all of the growth of migrants for Simcoe and Muskoka are for people coming from other parts of Ontario. There's a small portion of people leaving Simcoe for other provinces, and Simcoe gets a small number of people internationally. This is over 5 years, so 5,000 people over 5 years. Okay, the survey. So this is the 10th time we've done the survey. We had 77 employers visit the survey, which was a surprise to us. We've typically had a couple of hundred employers visit the survey. I make the comment here, it looks like we're reaching survey fatigue. I can tell you that because I do surveys with a number of other boards, everyone is seeing their numbers drop in terms of the surveys. That being said, it is interesting because we do a survey that's very similar to the one that's done by Peel and Halton. And I will show you this in a couple of slides, that even with a smaller sample size, the figures were the responses were very similar. So it gave us some reassurance that we still had a survey that provided us with some reliable figures. One of the issues we asked about was what's changing for you. What's different this year than from last year. The item that had the highest response rate was all about costs. It's about 93% said they're feeling the impact of rising costs, and 82% say they are feeling the pressure to raise wages. Like in the last couple of years, it's always been about labor shortages, and this year, what is now the big concern are costs. Items that received a medium proportion of concern were still challenges around recruiting entry-level workers or mid-level workers, challenges with supply chains. The number of new hires was not increasing as much as before, and concerns about retaining entry-level workers were also not as high as before. So some things are kind of slowing down in terms of their concern. We gave them, yep, sorry.
You're still on the net migration by age slide.
Yep.
Okay, just wanted to make sure that was.
Yeah, sorry, what's the question?
The slide
Oh, I see. That's the trouble with working on two screens, eh? Okay, sorry for that. Okay, so here's where I was. Wow, I was looking at the wrong screen. Next time we'll have to have this meeting in my place. So I was going through where people were reacting in terms of what they would consider to be the business concerns. So I was talking about the impact of rising costs and pressures to raise wages. We had given a number of options, and it was interesting that on some of them they said, "Oh, it's not applicable," or or "we don't know," which says to me it's not a big concern for them, or it's not an activity that they're much involved in. And one of the ones that were really struck me were they're not hiring temporary. A large portion are not hiring temporary foreign workers. I mean, that's restricted to a smaller set of employers, primarily in the agricultural sector and some manufacturing and a few service sector. They're not, fewer employers use temp agencies. That's also restricted to certain industries. Fewer are hiring international students. Some are, but the large portion aren't, and only a smaller portion said they are hiring much in the way of newcomers, because we don't have that many newcomers in Simcoe Muskoka. Okay. Where some other issues were, they say things haven't really changed. There are concerns about retention. Commuting is kind of this as big a problem as it's always been, and childcare. We asked them if they are currently experiencing a labor shortage, and this again is something I'm seeing in a lot of places, that employers are slightly more likely to say they have challenges for mid-level jobs. So mid-level jobs are jobs that are, skilled trades or college occupations that typically require a college education. Those are the areas where there seems to be more of a pressure point. Yes, entry-level jobs, there's still challenges, but more so saying no. 46% said no and 43% said yes. Far greater gap in terms of the mid-level jobs. We say, okay, if you have labor shortages, how are you dealing with it? And we would give a scale where if they said we do this often, we gave it 3 points. If you use it sometimes, we gave it 2 points. And then we add up all the responses and get an average result. So the two top ways that employers deal with labor shortages is they have management and supervisors working increased hours, or they have staff working increased hours. So that means overtime, right? And again, and I've seen this in several other surveys, this is the top way that they deal with labor shortages. Then it comes down to like postponing any business expansion plans, or they delay the delivery, like they're slower in delivering goods or services. And at the bottom, and as you can see, like the thing they rely on the least is temp agencies. There are again, as I said before, there's only certain industries that really make greater use of temp agencies, and they, fewer of them say they turn to community agencies to help them recruit employees. So that was also lower on the list. In terms of what kind of strategies they use in recruitment in order to address labor shortages, by far, already half of them, 47% say we try and diversify a workforce. Like instead of just going to one particular group that we've typically hired from, we are looking at a range, whether it's, we're looking at older workers, or we're looking to hire more youth, or we're looking to hire more persons with disabilities, or, Indigenous persons, or whatever. That has become a common strategy already among many employers. And here we had around 24% say they are already hiring international students. Okay, but otherwise, all these other categories, like hiring internationally and having people work remotely, was not it was only very few were using it. Some were thinking of using it. 24% were saying they're considering that option. But then all these others really fall off, like outsourcing work to contractors, or hiring temporary foreign workers, or hiring internationally and bringing them here to Canada. These are all things that were not being used. In terms of by conditions of work, we meant what are you doing in terms of the contract that is trying to attract people? And we had to use real abbreviations here, so let me explain what they are. The top thing that people do is they're increasing the wages of current employees. Okay, that is the most significant strategy, and almost half are doing that, and a third are considering doing that. Next is increasing the wages of new employees. And then it falls off a bit. Then we're talking about flexible scheduling, or increasing benefits for current employees or new employees. Then it falls off even more, like offering remote or hybrid work was much less relied upon by the employers who are responding to this survey. And then things like reducing qualifications for the job, like half of the employers, 51%, said we're not even considering that. And same thing with offering a 4-day week. They're not considering that. And they really don't like the idea of offering a signing bonus. Okay, so their response and how they change the contract of employment is primarily focusing on increasing wages and offering flexible scheduling. Okay. We asked about training, and essentially most employers say we encourage employers to take training, we provide training. And the third highest thing they say they do is that we work with educational institutions in order to provide co-op and internship placements. Okay, those are some of the ways that they ensure that there's a trained workforce. They're less likely to provide paid time off for learning, and they're less likely to provide cash support for tuition. And at the bottom of the list, it was like a very small proportion, 13% said they make use of government training. But what I did find interesting, and those of you who provide this might be interested to know, that almost a third, 29%, say they are considering seeking out government training programs because they want to take advantage of the cost savings there. We had a question that asked about what we called external factors. What are things outside of the labor market that you feel is affecting the availability of job candidates in Simcoe and Muskoka. And by far and away, affordable housing was the top issue. They said it's, it has a great impact. Secondly was commuting, that commuting posed challenges for people, and both the time of commuting and sometimes not having accessibility to a car, availability of public transit and availability of childcare during the day, were a median level of concern, and similarly childcare on evenings or weekends. I mean, these were concerns, like they're halfway between, like it would be like a medium impact, but by far and away, affordable housing was the biggest concern, or like these employers viewed it as one of the single greatest reasons why it was difficult to have a sufficient number of job candidates in Simcoe and Muskoka, because of the lack of affordable housing in the local communities. We asked them about their level of satisfaction with the skills of their current employees. And again, we used a composite score to rate them in terms of being very satisfied or somewhat satisfied. And overall, like on average, they're somewhat satisfied with their current employees. There's a set of skills where they're more satisfied, like teamwork or customer service, or the technical skills needed for the job. And you can see where they rank them lower is the resilience of their workers, their leadership or leadership potential, the problem-solving skills, even digital skills were just slightly below somewhat satisfied. But in comparison, they have a much lower opinion of the skills of job candidates. You can see the item that had the highest rating, 0.53 for the literacy and numeracy skills of their workforce. 0.53 among current employees would be lower than anything, right? So like on every scale, the job candidates are ranked much lower, and on a number of items, they actually got a slightly negative score. The worst score was on reliability and showing up. That received a lot of negative scoring there, but also the resilience and leadership items and problem solving. But on so many of these factors, right, there's such a sharp distinction between their current employees and who they saw out in the labor market. We asked about technology, and just to kind of explain, we would ask them how quickly they adopt new technology, and we created these categories of innovators, are those who are kind of like right off the bat they take on new technology. Early adopters, they're not the first, but they adopt it relatively soon. Early majority say they're cautious, but they're open to adopting. Late majority say they wait until something becomes very mainstream and they're kind of skeptical of technology. And late adopters are kind of the last people to adopt new technology. So we asked them to kind of classify themselves, and this is how they did. Like there's a small group, there's 14% say they adopt it right away. Early adopters, so they adopt it pretty soon. An early majority. So most people tend to adopt relatively earlier, and it's interesting because when you compare, I'm going to show you, this is the slide for Peel and Halton. And we asked this question around 6 years ago in Peel and Halton as well. So we were able to compare. So in Peel and Halton, if you look at the orange lines, which is the 2017, that's kind of very similar to the Simcoe Muskoka, okay, in terms of that breakdown. But what's happened in Peel and Halton is in that 6 years, there's been a slight shift of more people moving from the early majority to the early adopter, which is just telling us that, people are, as technology keeps on changing faster, people are now starting to kind of get on that, are also adopting it sooner rather than later. We asked if they're using AI. So we had talked about ChatGPT and all these other forms of artificial intelligence, and only around 1 in 6 right now are currently using AI, but another quarter are studying it. Still, a good portion say we don't think that technology is ready, and there's another group who say we don't think this technology applies to the kind of work that we do. We asked if they use AI in the recruitment process. And interestingly, around 13% are already using some form of AI. So that's some sort of automated way of reviewing resumes. And around 16% say they expect to use it in the next year. We asked what they thought the impact of new technology would be on jobs. Slightly more think there's going to be fewer jobs than think there's going to be more jobs, but the majority think there's going to be disruptions, which means there are going to be some job losses in some categories, but there are going to be job increases in other categories, and the net result would be no change in jobs. That being said, it is noteworthy that there's more of them who if they had to choose, they think there are going to be fewer jobs. And I'm going to compare that to Peel and Halton, where the figures for 2023 are almost exactly the same as the figures for Simcoe and Muskoka, where you have slightly more thinking there are fewer jobs than there will be more jobs. And what's interesting is that compared to 6 years ago, they thought there would be more. More said there would be more jobs than fewer jobs. So there's been a change in the last 6 years where we seem to be, where employers are now starting to think, we thought this was going to create more jobs. Now we're thinking it's not going to create more jobs. Certainly, still the majority think there's going to be disruptions, but there's been a slight change in terms of optimism or pessimism about the number of jobs. We asked about what kind of skills they think they need in the future with all this technological change, and basic computers. We're talking about, word processing, spreadsheets, and emailing is like almost kind of like absolutely necessary. It ranks right up there. And then they're more concerned about things like finance and accounting and business and marketing. At the bottom of the list, the things that don't receive that much kind of priority are coding skills or AI or machine learning skills or web design, or and I think partly that's because it's not as if every person who's applying for a job doesn't need to do that. They only need specialists for those areas, and they'll hire them or contract them when they need them. But every employee needs to have basic computer skills. Finally, on remote work, we asked currently what percentage of time their employees are working either at work or or remotely, and so 52% of employers say their employees are working all the time at work. 52%. And then, there's a certain portion, around 10% saying, 23% saying that they spend around 90% of their time at work and 10% of their time working remotely, and then it drops off after that. We've asked this question now for several years, both before COVID, during COVID, after COVID, for 2022 and 2023. So essentially, the red line is COVID, right? So all of a sudden you can see we had 27% of employees who are spending 80 to 100% of their time working from home, and another 16% who are kind of like roughly half the time between work and home. So the storyline is that we have not gone back to the way things were before, right? We still have a very high proportion of people who are working from home, working in the workplace, but it's around almost 15% less. And where it's settled is not that they're working remotely, it's the hybrid. It's that they're spending 30 to 70% of their time. It's not a huge amount, but it's enough. It's a big change from what it was before COVID. we would ask them about a couple of questions about COVID. We said, before COVID, did you provide some remote work? And most of them, that got a negative score, say, no, we didn't provide, we didn't encourage remote work. Do you think remote work is as productive as working in the workplace? And a slightly negative score there. Most employers feel it's time to return to the workplace and that full-time attendance is better, but they had a lower agreement on whether they felt they could find a suitable hybrid arrangements that satisfied their employee desires and what the business needed. And I will say on this question, Simcoe and Muskoka employers were less optimistic than what I've seen in other surveys, especially like in Peel and Halton. In Peel and Halton, there's a much higher agreement that they can find a suitable hybrid arrangement that satisfies employees and satisfies employers. When we ask them to compare remote work and in-person work and hybrid work, in almost every category, they feel in-person is better. Although it's a bit more of a tie between in-person and hybrid on things like whether the employee can find the right work-life balance and the ability to attract new job candidates and the ability to retain current employees. They concede that hybrid work is more likely to attract and retain employees and contribute to a better work-life balance. This is a slide we had last year, just about the proportion. This is from the census about the change between 2016 and 2021 of the percentage of people working from home. So this is working largely from home. So this is the second column. So Muskoka in 2016 had around 10% of employees working from home. And in 2021, it was double that. And Simcoe went from 7% to 21%. So I'm just showing this to say we had a significant change, but I guess one point to make is that this was taken in May 2021 when we still were recovering from COVID. So those figures are likely down. But in terms of in terms of Canada as a whole, the proportion of people who are spending most of their hours working from home, while it shot up, of course, during COVID, went up over 40%, it's still at around a 20% mark, okay? But what's different, what is noteworthy, is that the proportion of people who are working hybrid has been slowly increasing. It's the proportion of people who are working exclusively from home that has been dropping. All of which is, I'm just trying to make the point that it seems to me like this hybrid pattern is not only here to stay, but it seems to be kind of embedded in practices and has been taking over from people working from home exclusively, because there's everyone's finding some benefit from hybrid work. Okay, so we're right near the end, so I'm just going to give you some slides that kind of give us a summary. So I've mentioned unemployment rates have inched higher towards the end of 2023. Particularly we saw for Barrie, but it's trending downward in Muskoka Kawarthas. Participation rates have trended higher, and we saw the differences in much lower participation rate in Muskoka Kawarthas than in Kitchener, Waterloo, Barrie. Long-term unemployment has dropped considerably. Job vacancy rates increased after COVID, dropped since then, but they're still higher than before COVID. Median employment income went up everywhere in 2021. We saw Muskoka incomes in particular are very low, and female incomes much lower than male incomes. Net migration is almost, for both Simcoe and Muskoka, it's from the rest of Ontario. For Simcoe, the largest category is 25 to 44-year-olds. In Muskoka, it's 45 to 64-year-olds. Everywhere, the largest population growth is among those 65 years and older. The number of business establishments has recovered since COVID, but more so among small firms, right? We saw some declines among large firms. The Employment Ontario client numbers are down from pre-COVID. Employers are worried about rising costs and wages. They're somewhat satisfied with the skills of current employees, much less so with job seekers. It looks like employers are starting to adopt technology faster, but they are recognizing that there could be job losses as a result. And I get a sense that in Simcoe Muskoka, there's a certain resistance to hybrid work, whereas the experience elsewhere might suggest that others are adapting to it much better. Okay, so we have a few more minutes. If there are any questions, happy to try and provide some answers.
So please either raise your hand or put a question in the chat box. I will note that we will have this presentation. We're recording it. It will be uploaded onto our website. And Tom, if you are agreeable, we will send the slide presentation out to attendees.
Absolutely.
Fabulous. So any questions? I found all of this information just fascinating. It really gets my internal geek on, so that's great. So we do have a question from Barrie Literacy Council. Do we know if there is data for completed apprenticeships versus new registrations?
What we have, what the ministry provides us are the number of certificate of completion that are issued per year, but we don't have a way of measuring that for the number of, like, we don't know which year that person started, so we don't have a good percentage of completions. There, StatsCan does have that kind of data, but it's only at a provincial level. We don't have it at a local level, and it's usually in terms of larger categories. It's not always by each specific trade, but kind of like categories of trades. Okay, so we used to have, I have to say, when we had the College of Trades, we had better data. Now we don't get as good data as we used to get. It's not tracked as well as it used to be.
Thank you. Okay, well, if there are no further questions, then oh wait, we have another question. Do we know if registration numbers are primarily from newcomers or other?
We used to know that. Again, like if we had the kind of numbers we had with the College of Trades, we used to be able to have that. Again, we might have that we would have that at a provincial level. And from what I'm seeing, I don't think we're, the trends in terms of newcomers going into trades, I think is still not similar to that of Canadian-born. I think Canadian-born are more likely to go into trades.
Okay. Kwame has his hand up. Go ahead.
Thank you. No, great presentation, Tom. A lot of good information here, and it kind of validates some of the things that we've been witnessing on the ground in terms of employment services. And one key thing to note is prior to January of this year, employment services targets were hit at around 60% or less. And we're trending now at 87% of that said target. And one of the reasons being that we've noticed the change is that prior to January, we had those, what do they call it? The eligibility for program. And there was a 10%, what they call it, exception rate. That has moved, we've moved away from that in terms of the individuals that are eligible for service. So it's way more open. So we're seeing a lot of individuals coming in. So even if they're employed, they can come in with the goal of employment because they might be in precarious employment, whatever it might be. But there's no cap on that exception rate of 10%. So even though the number of unemployed individuals is declining, the number of EO clients that are registering have increased a bit. It's definitely not to pre-COVID numbers at all, but it's trending better than previous year.
Thanks for your comment, Kwame. Anyone else?
Yeah, another one from Barry Literacy. Could you go back to the skills that mentioned LBS and confirm if it is a problem, or sorry, confirm if it is not a problem for employers or it is?
Well, I guess you know, it's a low rating, right? It's below somewhat satisfied. But only in relation to a whole bunch of other things. It's not. They have far bigger worries about, let's say, reliability, clearly, than about literacy. But even in terms of digital skills, they rank digital skills lower than they rank their satisfaction with literacy and numeracy skills.
Does that answer your question, Judy? Okay, great. Okay. So Tom, thank you for the amazing presentation. Lots of great information there. And as I said, the webinar will be available on our website. So once again, Tom, we love this presentation. It just it really makes us all think about the numbers and how they apply to our work. So as the Workforce Board and the Literacy Network, we also get to work on great projects that support our workforce. And I would like to, you've heard Matt in the background, and I'd like to introduce you to Matt Boissel. Matt is our soft skills solution manager here, and he's going to talk to you a little bit about soft skills.
Thank you very much, Sherry. Yeah, Soft Skills Solutions, program that we've been running for almost, geez, we're coming on 5, 6, 7 years now. I've got to imagine. So it's a program that we've seen success with, a lot of great success stories. Basically, the program is developed for job seekers who are looking to address their certain soft skills that they need to improve on. It will provide them with a certificate so that when they can do this program, when they complete the program, they'll get a certificate, and it is something that they can provide future employers saying, hey, I've done my soft skills training. It is, we've been told, especially in the, actually we've been told recently in the corrections industry, so in prisons, where some of the prisons are running a program, this program specifically, they've had some success of people coming out of the system and being able to socialize again properly and be able to kind of integrate themselves back into the community with less difficulty than someone who hasn't taken the program. So it's not just for inmates, obviously, it's for everyone who is currently looking for a job. The program is free. Through our not-for-profit partners, we are working on a curriculum for employers so that we can offer it to, so we can offer the program to employers to run within their own company. With that being said, it's not a, if you know of any companies in your network that could benefit with something like this, even though we can't provide them with a curriculum for employers, we do have a list of providers who are working on who can provide the program for I guess the employees to go in and do the program through the not-for-profit. So may not be as efficient as having it run through the business, but that is something that is available to employers. Essentially, within these soft skills, we are looking to enhance the employability of job seekers, as well as improving work performance and profits for current employees. As I mentioned, we are building a specific curriculum. It's not just focusing on communications within the office, but as well as collaboration, personal management, problem solving, creativity, little things like don't bring up politics in the cafeteria, right? Little things like don't hit reply all on an email, things that may be simple to understand for us, but for somebody who may not have the complete soft skills, soft skill set, we'll call it, may not recognize not to do something like that. We also have for not-for-profit organizations a train the trainer program. So if you are looking to become a facilitator, or if your organization wants to run this program, we do have a train the trainer program, which is about 25 to 30 hours, where you'll work with our master trainer, Samantha Timbers, and she will run down the course, teach everything you need to know, and you'll be able to run the program from there. There is also a new reporting system that we've been using. It's called Acorn. It's a learning management system that we've been using for soft skills. It allows your facilitators to get certificates and communicate with with their learners in a more efficient manner. Chatting more soft skills program for employers to be available. That we're still working on it. It's proving to be difficult as employers are looking to have a shorter program. They can't afford to have their employees be away for a week almost, because the actual program itself is about 5 hour sessions. So we are trying to shorten it to maybe even, a couple 2-3 hour sessions. But that's proving to be difficult, as there's a lot of great information and great stuff in the program itself. So it's that we're working on that actively, but unfortunately I don't have a date for you at this time, Rachel. I apologize for that. But yeah, that's kind of the Coles notes of the program. You can email me, Matt at smskillforce.ca, if you are interested in becoming a facilitator, or if you are looking for more information. Also, our website, smskillforce.ca. There's a tab where you can check out more on the program, and you should be able to reach out to us there as well. So if you'd like to register, please reach out, and we'll be happy to get you connected with Sam and take part in the Train the Trainer course. If anybody has any questions on soft skills, I'd be more than happy to help you out. Feel free to ask them now. The program can be taught in class or over Zoom. The only kind of rule that we have is that it can't be pre-recorded. So it's got to be live. So if you're going to do it on Zoom, just make sure or if you're going to do it online, just make sure it's live. In class, obviously, is live as well. But we need that interaction between the facilitators and the learners to really develop those skills.
Thanks, Matt. Nice summary. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
So thank you again to our presenters today, to Kwame Brown, Tom Zizys, and Matt, for speaking to the various areas that we produced today. Again, thank you all for attending. If you have any questions, please reach out to us at Simcoe Muskoka Skillforce. We'd be happy to answer your questions. You can reach Matt at smskillforce.ca. You can reach me at Sherry at smskillforce.ca, and we would be thrilled to answer your questions. And we're going to launch a survey. And if you don't have time to complete that survey right now, we would ask, I'm going to send the presentation out and some other information to you. And we'll also send the survey as well. If you could respond, we would really appreciate that. And thank you for joining us this morning. We're looking forward to working with you and our local community partners to continue to support our workforce and development in literacy services. And I hope that you all have a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks so much. Thanks, Matt and Avery, for being the awesome sauce that you are.
Well, I'm not going to speak on Avery's behalf, but thank you. It was my pleasure.
Thank you.
Enjoy doing that.
I think that went